Well, it has slowed down quite dramatically, as you know, and I think that started with the credit crunch. This was incidentally a self-inflicted wound made in the USA and exported to the UK and parts of continental Europe and elsewhere. So that has triggered what is a very extensive process of deleveraging overall. And then simultaneously, we've seen resources prices appreciate really quite dramatically. Not quite across the boards, but the broad indices for commodities have all risen to levels that people have not seen for a very, very long time due to this increasing demand from globalization and the costs of increasing production. So that's created another headwind which has slowed the global economy, and that's the position we're in right now. Well, it's good and bad. It's very good if you're an oil producer. It's very bad if one is an oil importing country, because we can think of it effectively as a tax on other forms of expenditure that might have otherwise taken place. On the other hand, if we take a very, very long-term view, it is now initiating belatedly a very creative process where a lot of capital, energy, and human energy, I should say, and technology will be directed towards being more efficient consumers and coming up with all the alternatives which are so important in terms of our long-term future. So that will be an exciting prospect in terms of long-term investment themes. Well, they're always too good to last, aren't they? I think basically what happened is that we were coming off a long disinflationary period where central banks became really quite complacent about inflationary pressures. And then we had a rather delusional fret about deflation, largely due to the competitive pressures created by globalization, particularly in the manufacturing sector. So this helped to keep prices down, and some people got rather emotional about what they felt were the possible long-term deflationary consequences of this. And as a consequence, the central banks just kept printing more and more money to keep their currencies competitive. And we saw this in a series of waves, really starting from 1997 onwards. We saw it with the Asian crisis, we saw it with the Russian debt default, the long-term capital mismanagement collapse, we saw it with the Y2K paranoia, and then following the dot-com crash, and then 9/11. So they kept throwing and throwing money, and that of course sowed the seeds of the inflationary cycle that we're now in. Absolutely, it does. It's painful when we are experiencing it as investors, because we get some deleveraging, and that also causes some money to shift into other asset classes, but it does of course improve valuations, and those eventually become the bargains that do so well for people who are able to identify them and buy them for the medium to longer term. Well, we're still in a very sticky patch here because we have the high commodity prices. Central banks have belatedly countered this, or attempted to counter it, with higher interest rates. We are still seeing the effects of the credit crisis that we saw earlier on. Even though I'm sure that we've passed the nadir as far as that's concerned, the knock-on effects will linger on in the global economy for really quite some time. So this is a tricky, turbulent period for the global economy. I suspect it will start improving gradually during the second half of this year, and more so in 2009.